This is Politics and Media 101. I'm Jeff Browning. Joe Walsh is a former Republican member of Congress from Illinois. He ran against Donald Trump in the Republican primary in 2020 and ultimately lost. He now has a podcast, White Flag with Joe Walsh, where, very much like us on Politics and Media 101, he seeks out voices from across the political spectrum, especially people with whom he disagrees, and tries to find the real sources of those disagreements, sometimes finding surprising things and finding points of consensus in unexpected places. We talked to him about the current state of affairs around the world, but particularly in the United States, what our political parties are getting right and wrong in his view, what voters on both sides are getting right and wrong in his view, and where he thinks things are likely to go from here. Like all of our episodes, this is an edited version of a much longer conversation that was taped with live audience questions. For past episodes or information about how to join us, please visit our website, pm101.live. Please also take a second to subscribe on whichever streaming service you're using right now so you don't miss our next episode this Friday featuring Matt Stoller, who's a fellow at the Open Markets Institute and an expert on the history and politics of monopoly power. But first, former U.S. Congressman Joe Walsh. Without any further ado, let's roll the tape.
When the Ukraine crisis sparked off, you had a notable faction, I call them, of the Trump crazies in the GOP, spouting pro-Putin talking points from Steve Bannon to Tucker Carlson. And then even some members of Congress were confused about why we would ever support Ukraine. Ever since then, Tucker Carlson has walked his comments back. It looks like all but 3 members of the House today voted to stand and support the Ukrainian people. That's pretty darn good. Do you see any type of newfound unity in the GOP, in Congress, that we can build off of to promote democracy?
No. No, Justin. I mean, again, if you want me to drop the mic, I will, but no. Look, don't ever forget, when Putin's war began, and this is all on him, when he invaded a week and a couple days ago, instantly, Justin, we all had a reaction. Instantly. And I don't know about you, but my instant reaction was, I'm fucking pissed off at Putin. I'm so sad for the people. Right away, instantly, I sided with Ukraine. You want to know what a person really is and what he really believes? It's how they instantly reacted to this. And Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo and Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and Laura Ingraham go down the line, all of them, and a hell of a lot more instantly. When this thing fucking broke, Justin, they all sided with Putin, praised Putin, or defended Putin. Now that's who they are. And they've spent the last 7 or 8 days trying to walk some of that stuff back. But Justin, you know, that's all bullshit. That's all politicians and media people taking polls, figuring out where their constituents are, being told what to do. None of that's real. Don't ever forget how these people lined up right when this thing went down.
When you were in office and there was a crisis like this going on, where we wanted to have a kind of common American purpose in the way we addressed it, how did you address it? What was your approach to those emergencies that happened when you were a member of Congress?
I don't believe members of Congress and members of Fox News and the media, everybody's got to rally behind the flag. I don't believe that. I believe in freedom. I think every member of Congress needs to speak their mind. And as America potentially gets further involved in a war, in Putin's war, let's remember that Congress has a role here. So no, I don't believe that we all got to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I think people should speak out and speak their opinions. The point I was making is there is a wing of the Republican Party that is pro-Putin because authoritarianism, John, has really kind of taken over the Republican Party. And I think that's the issue, and that's what Americans need to condemn.
Yeah. I wasn't suggesting that there shouldn't be necessarily any diversity of opinion. What I'm suggesting is that, and I thought that you were also suggesting, that at a time of international emergency, certainly members of Congress should put their understanding of the country's interest ahead of their concern over the next election or their political constituency.
I agree. I agree with that, John. But every member of Congress may have a different opinion as to what their country's interest is.
So,
now,
Joe, when you were in office then at that period, I'd like to know kind of what your understanding of America's interest was in the context of those emergencies and how you approached it as a member of Congress at that time.
Well, a good question, John. I'm generally a pretty consistent non-interventionist. I generally don't want, I want America to have the biggest, baddest military in the world, but I am very loath to use it. And so I opposed the war in Iraq. I think we were in Afghanistan 19 years too long. I generally oppose American involvement in wars overseas unless particularly our interests are threatened or the interest of our allies, and we are a member of NATO.
So, Joe, let's see if we can figure out kind of what you think is appropriate then for the United States to do in our policy amidst the current emergency. So, obviously, this idea of a no-fly zone is a bit fanciful. What about these other measures that the U.S. are taking, which are quite strong? For example, the provision of lethal military aid to the Ukrainian government, and then also the use of rather severe sanctions against the Russian central bank, kicking certain Russian banks off of the SWIFT payment system. What do you think about these kinds of measures? What do you think is the appropriate response?
I think what President Biden and the rest of the world is doing, trying to bring Russia to its fucking knees economically, is the right thing to do. And I would continue to do more of it. I do all of it. And I think the alliance has done a great job. And again, I think a lot of people don't understand that already the sanctions we put on Russia are unprecedented. We should do more. The other thing I would support is arming. Absolutely. Sending the Ukrainian military every and all kinds of arms we and the rest of the alliance can supply them with. Third thing we ought to do is support Zelensky and the Ukrainian government, whether they're there and or abroad in exile, however we can. And look, John, final point I'll make is Russia may take Kyiv in 3 days. Russia may put up a sham government in a week. They will never take over that country. There will be an insurgency war for 20, 30, 40 years, and the United States and our alliance should be there supporting the insurgents for as long as we have to.
So I want to go to principles first, because how can you have such a big tent with a neocon and then somebody like yourself who's generally non-interventionist, but you just basically outlined a lot of what President Biden is doing, and he's getting praise from all the serious people in foreign policy. But what do you rate of his State of the Union performance? Because he's not the most eloquent guy, but I want to hear what you think of the speech. Was he uniting, dividing?
Look, Joe Biden's about 130 years old, and I voted for him, and I did everything I could to help elect him. And if it's Biden against Trump or Biden against DeSantis in 2024, I'm on Team Biden again. He can no longer communicate. And sadly, that's a big, big part of a president's job. If I would have advised him, Justin, on the State of the Union, I wouldn't have advised him to do what he did last night, which is, the laundry list of a bunch of economic crap that we want to do, blah, blah, blah. I would have focused on making democracy, defending democracy here and abroad, the theme of my speech, and I would have kept it at that. And I would have rallied the American people around democracy here and why it's so important for us to defend a democracy called Ukraine. I think he gave a pretty good speech, though. He was strong. I don't care that he makes bloopers and gaffes. We all do. So I think overall for Biden, it was a pretty good speech, but I wish he could more forcefully tell the American people why we're all going to have to suck it up a little bit economically, because if we really want to bring Russia to its knees economically, we're going to feel that too.
So, Joe, we're talking about the speech. What do we think then about Biden's performance more generally? Do you think that decisions that he's made have contributed to some of the things that people in the country are unhappy about, reflecting his approval ratings, inflation, economic circumstances. How much do you think this is related to decisions that Biden actually made? What do you think about his policy performance?
It's a great question, John, because I'm not a Democrat. So I'm going to answer it kind of in a weird fashion. I think generally people kind of suck. Like the American people are so up and down, in and out, that they don't stay paying attention. They lose attention. Biden, I think, was dealt a really tough hand. Okay, a once in a lifetime pandemic that we were not coming out of yet. I think generally policy wise, he's done a damn good job when it comes to COVID. But John, again, a big part of a president's job is communicating. He's not really able to do that. I think he's handled this Putin war masterfully. Joe Biden rallied the rest of the world to be unified against Putin. If Donald Trump were still president, Donald Trump would be supporting Putin. I don't believe that's hyperbole at all. Think about that. I think Biden's done a great job behind the scenes making this work. I think, John, last thing I'll say, I think Biden screwed up a little bit. I think Biden should have come into office, done the COVID relief thing, and then gotten infrastructure passed. Win-win. But he let the disunity in his party dominate him. He passed an infrastructure bill. Damn it, that should have been a huge victory, but it wasn't taken that way because Build Back Better and we want to transform the American economy and do all these other things. That was a mistake. Biden should have left that alone until after 2022.
So basically, your theory of the case is he should have just gone at it with Republicans to get this thing through the House and the Senate and avoided all the negative media from Build Back Better, and he might be a little bit better off.
Bingo. Joe Biden needed to take a longer view, and I would argue Democrats need to take a longer view. Our democracy right now is under threat. We have a 50-50 Senate. Joe Biden won by only 50,000 votes. Hey, AOC and all the rest of you, Bernie, you're not going to transform America in 2 years. What you need to do is score some victories these first 2 years and then communicate those victories and then make sure you hold the House and the Senate because, again, take the long view. Our democracy is under threat. It's under threat from this Republican Party. We cannot let the Republican Party control the House and the Senate, and Donald Trump may run again in 2024. But instead, John, Biden let himself get overrun by his own party. So he didn't get those victories, or they weren't the perceived victories. And a lot of Americans out there think Democrats are just fighting with each other. And now the Republicans are probably going to take control of the House.
So, Joe, you've talked about how, from your perspective, the left wing of the Democratic Party have dragged Biden to the left and created problems for him and his perception and so on. What kind of more specifically are you thinking of? Like, what are the policy elements here that you think have created this problem? And in what specific areas have the left wing of the Democratic Party moved Biden this way that you think are so problematic politically?
John, I'd point out two things: Build Back Better and the voting rights stuff at the national level. If I could have sat down with AOC in the left wing, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, I would have said the same thing to them. Guys, Democrats, you are in charge of this city by a very little bit. Think long term. You want to hang on to at least the House in 22, and you want to reelect a Democratic president in 24. You can't get all of Build Back Better in 2 years. And if you try to, AOC, it's going to hurt you big time in 22. So play the long game. I would have told them the same thing. And John, the piece of voting rights legislation, I mean, again, everything but the kitchen sink was in that bill. And the American people didn't understand it. And again, the Democrats wanted to almost transform the way we run elections in this country. I didn't like that bill because in America, states run elections. I think that needed to be the focus. And John, the other point I'll mention is Republicans know this. And Republicans, through Trump, are trying to elect secretaries of state in state after state after state in this country. And if the Republicans succeed this November, they're going to have about 20 to 22 Marjorie Taylor Greenes in charge of the counting of and the running of elections in state after state in this country. Democrats haven't been paying attention to this because they put all their marbles on this humongous voting rights bill in D.C. that never had a prayer to begin with.
Why did the president help incite the riot that killed 5 people at the Capitol? It may be because 4 days earlier, he failed to get the state of Georgia to take away Joe Biden's victory. Georgia's top election official, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, spent an hour on the phone listening to the president lie and threaten. Mr. Trump spun tales of fraud and told Raffensperger he needed to find 11,780 votes, one more vote than Biden's winning margin in the state. Raffensperger is a lifelong Republican, voted for Mr. Trump, and contributed to his campaign. But facing the president's wrath, he would not choose loyalty over duty.
The story will continue in a moment.
What do you mean by protecting democracy? Is there any policies we can enact?
Yes. And there need to be some things done at the federal level, and there need to be a lot of things done at the state level. I can tell you, because I know, that my former political party, they put all their marbles into trying to change at the state level how votes are counted and how elections are run. To me, that's a much bigger threat to this country, to our democracy, than trying to keep people from voting. Republicans always want fewer people to vote because they know when more people vote, Democrats do better. But you know what? At the end of the day, they can't stop you from voting. If you all get off your ass and get out and vote like you did in 2020, they can't stop you. Now, yeah, there are some things that we need to do, and there are some things that the courts need to do to make sure everybody has access to the vote. But it's this issue of the counting and the approval of the results at the state level. That's where Republicans, like a laser beam, are focused. So in 2024, if Donald Trump loses by 50,000 votes in 3 or 4 states again, he's counting on having 3 or 4 Marjorie Taylor Greenes in charge of the vote in that state to not do what the Georgia Republican Secretary of State did in 2020. That's the threat.
I agree that that is the threat. So I want to transition. We've talked a lot about messaging, and you definitely know how to message. You're always in the media. And we talked a little bit about principles first. So help me understand what principles first is. And I say this with love in my heart. I'm now a Democrat, but principles first has a lot of our guests on it, people who are pariahs in the GOP. So what kind of impact do you think, whether this is an organization or not, maybe it's a collection of organizations, but what do you think the impact can be of the principles first groups, and what are you trying to accomplish through it?
I'm going to give you some really bad answers, Justin. I'm part of it. I don't know what the hell it is. Will they have an impact? I doubt it. We are like the island of misfit toys. Again, what are we talking about? We're talking about former Republicans and people who believe they're principled conservatives who want nothing to do with this new authoritarian Republican Party. But that party can't be saved, Justin. And most of these principled first folk, they're not there yet. I mean, 2-3 years ago, I was saying time for a new party, time for a new party, time for a new party. When I was there this weekend, that's all I said. But they're not there.
So I do want to follow up. And again, there were a lot of great people in that room.
Love them.
Tom Nichols, Bill Crystal, Charlie Sykes, Olivia Troy we've had on. She's down to earth, awesome.
Yep.
But then you guys associate yourselves with someone like Alyssa Farrow. And she was running Trump's communication shop after the election throughout the whole big lie. It got a little bit too hot with her on January 6th, and then she left. But she was up there. She was running comms. She was supporting these attacks on democracy and autocracy to further her own career. And now it got a little too hot. So she takes a step back, and then she's at Principles First. How can a movement like this include someone responsible for the big lie and have any credibility? I really struggle with it.
Hey, Justin, again, I do too. You said like you guys had her speak at that conference. I didn't. I was just a speaker. Justin, it's not really a formal group. This is like the second summit they've had where they pull together these principled, never Trump people, and we all talk about what we should do and aren't we great and blah, 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 and all the rest. I don't approve certain speakers. Justin, I agree, though, with the point you're making. Someone like Alyssa, and there are others who still stuck with Trump during the big lie, and then after the election, they stuck with him. And a lot of people then got wigged out after January 6th. I have very little sympathy for those people. Donald Trump was spouting the big lie the summer before the election. And for anybody to still be working for it, hey, Justin, it's like Bill Barr. Bill Barr is coming out with a book soon that's going to tell us how dangerously unfit he thinks Donald Trump is. Well, fuck Bill Barr. Fuck Bill Barr. Fuck Bill Barr. And I mean this. Bill Barr knew when he was Attorney General how dangerously unfit Trump was. When Bill Barr decided to act like Trump's lawyer instead of America's lawyer, he knew how dangerously unfit is. Look, I'm not going to buy or read a book written by anybody who worked for Trump and knew in real time how dangerous he was, but didn't say a damn thing. And then after the fact, they write a book to tell us how unfit he is. I agree with you. Those people, I have no patience for them.
You're saying that you don't control priorities first or principles first. It's not your outfit. So obviously you can't speak to all those speakers, and that's totally fair. Let's talk about the media project that you are kind of behind, and that's your podcast, White Flag, with Joe Walsh. And so on this podcast, you're talking to people, like we said before, people like Parker Malloy, people across the political spectrum who maybe you disagree with. What have you kind of learned from talking to all these kinds of guests? Have you found that your mind has changed as a result of some of these conversations?
Yeah, John, it's interesting. Early on, I sat down, I had a conversation with Fred Guttenberg, who you may know, whose daughter was killed in a mass shooting, 16-year-old daughter killed at a mass shooting in Florida, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. He and I disagree on guns. I'm a big gun guy. I'm a big Second Amendment guy. He and I sat down for an hour, and we talked about gun policy, gun laws. And son of a gun, if he and I didn't actually come together and agree on one potential reform, expanding background checks, universal background checks, doing everything we can do up front to make sure that somebody who shouldn't have a gun doesn't. And he was there, but I got there because of an hour-long conversation with him where we finally found some common ground. That kind of thing has been happening every week. You know, John, we live in a country right now where every night I go to Fox News or every night I go to MSNBC. And damn it, that's the only kind of people I talk to, and that's the only kind of stuff I support. Very few people are speaking across that divide. We have to start doing that, or this country really, really is in big trouble.
So you mentioned, you go on some of these major media platforms, CNN, MSNBC, and just like you suggested, there's maybe a kind of siloed audience, a self-selected audience, people who have a prior inclination to agree with the hosts or the general editorial stance of the program, right? So if you're hosting conversations with people across the political spectrum, who is the audience for your show? Do you think that you're attracting listeners who have a diversity of kind of political ideologies? Who do you think are the main people who are kind of tuning in and listening?
So John, here's the weird thing about me, because I've had such a weird fucking journey the last 10 years. I was the musket grabbing Tea Party guy 10 years ago. I voted for Trump in 2016. I was a syndicated talk radio guy. I was on Fox News all the time. And then 4 or 5 years ago, I said, that's it. I'm done with Donald Trump. I'm going to oppose him. And so I've got a really weird following. I've got a lot of people on the left who follow me. I've got a lot of center right and center left people who follow me. But son of a gun, I still have a lot of GOP base voters who follow me. So as I look at my audience on this particular podcast, it's across the board. It certainly is mostly center right and center left, but we get a lot of far right and far left as well.
And Joe, you're talking about your journey over the last few years, and I'm remembering the primary challenge. And it's kind of funny how throughout recent American history, anytime an incumbent president gets a primary challenge, they lose, right? Whether it's Carter and Teddy Kennedy, whether it's Ford and Reagan, whether it's George Bush and Pat Buchanan. Do you take any credit for the 2020 loss of Donald Trump because of your primary challenge?
No, I mean, I'd like to think that, but the minute I got into that primary, the Republican Party, over the course of the next 2 weeks, they literally canceled 22 primaries and caucuses around the country. So effectively, I didn't have a prayer. I'd like to think I brought some attention to some conservatives. And John, one more thing. Because I come from the Trump cult, and it is a cult, and I do come from it, and I escaped it, every day I still engage with hundreds of these cult members, hundreds of people every day in the GOP base. And what I try to do, John, is I try to rescue them from the cult. And every week I'm able to rescue a few, not thousands, but a few. I think it's important to continue to try to do that.
And so, Joe, if you're talking to people in these different audiences who have, different kinds of biases, they have different kinds of perspectives, they have different kinds of backgrounds, they have different kinds of political orientations, do you find that you kind of modulate your tone and modify your argument and prioritize different things? When you're going on CNN versus when you're kind of talking to GOP primary voters, do you think that there's a big difference in the approach that you take when you're having these kinds of conversations and making these efforts to persuade and communicate?
When I'm speaking to people, when I'm speaking to my former supporters and followers in the GOP base, I try to listen as much as I can. I don't coddle them. I try to give them tough love. I find the best success I have in rescuing people from the GOP cult is putting little kernels of truth in front of them repetitively. And if I can get them to acknowledge, okay, Joe Biden did win in 2020. I was lied to by Trump. That kind of thing is what breaks the spell, I've found. On my podcast, look, I was, and Justin knows this, back in the day, I was a hellraiser. I've certainly changed the way I go about things because, look, the name of my podcast is White Flag. I don't want to fight anymore.
Joe Walsh, pissed off and riled up. I would never think that. Folks, White Flag with Joe Walsh. It is a very good podcast. I suggest you check it out. Our podcast is gaining popularity, so we will link to his podcast in our episode release so that you can just listen to ours with Joe and then click on it and subscribe to his and
by
give
the
it a
way,
5-star
Justin,
rating. Yes, sir.
I love what you guys do. Kudos to you guys. I just freaking love what you guys do. It's so damn important. And as always, you big knucklehead, anything I can do to help promote what you guys do, tell me.
And same, I really was touched by the conversation you had with Parker. Have you ever had anybody on your podcast that you regret, or on your radio show as a guest that you regret? And how do you deal with it? I'm asking for a personal question.
I'm having, Justin, a more difficult time getting people from the far right to sit down with me on my podcast. I'm having a tougher time. A guy like Eric Erickson would never come on my podcast because, very respectfully, I would ask him, why are you saying the things you're saying? Do you really believe? And I know, Justin, for a lot of these guys on the Republican side, it's just a game. They really don't believe what they're saying, which is why a lot of them don't want to go on podcasts. The toughest conversation I had so far is with a guy like Rick Santorum, who came on my podcast and, said some critical things about Trump. And then he tried to walk it back. And then he pretty much said Trump was unfit. And then he said he would still vote for Trump in 2024 if Trump was the nominee. And I was pulling my hair out, Justin. But what I had to keep reminding myself of is shut up, listen to him, let your audience hear what he has to say, because it's important for my audience to hear that even people like Rick Santorum and Chris Christie, no matter how much they badmouth Trump, they're still going to vote for him in 2024. Democrats need to realize that.
Yeah, no, at least Rick Santorum, Eric Erickson and the way you're describing Rick Santorum, very similar in everything.
Justin,
yeah.
Trump has literally broken people. Eric Erickson is one of them. There are tons of people in my former world of right-wing media, Glenn Beck is another one, who have been fucking broke by Trump because they are just afraid to stand on their own 2 feet. Eric Erickson he's a broken man.
We'll stay in touch. I do want to get a tequila with you, though, but let's go to some audience questions here. We're going to start with Andy Lowry from the UK. He's actually calling in from Oxford. And then we'll go to Shanette. Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Justin. Many thanks for joining us today, Joe. Great to hear from you. I would be fascinated to hear your thoughts on yesterday's State of the Union address. Many thanks.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for listening. God bless you. I think generally it was a good, forceful speech by Biden, and that is not 80-year-old Joe Biden's forte anymore. But anybody listening to that speech, Andy, from anywhere around the world knows that America and Biden and the alliance is freaking united against Putin, and we will bring Putin to his knees. Joe Biden conveyed that, and that was the most important thing he had to do. Everything else he talked about domestically, to me, was just silly noise.
We are going to go to Aram next. So over to Aram.
Thanks, John and Justin, and thanks for being here, Joe. So lost in the massive onslaught of news yesterday, we saw a bunch of really terrible things happen in the election. One, the new Texas laws apparently broke mail-in voting, and we also saw Assembly Speaker Robin Vos from Wisconsin release a report that was one of the most frontal attacks on democracy that we've seen in any state in the entire country. It went so far as to call efforts by county clerks trying to increase turnout inherently partisan. So if your county clerk is trying to help you figure out how to vote, that's apparently now partisan activity. How do you think just people who are pro-democracy, right? Whatever that big tent is, whether that's, walk-away Republicans or independents, people in the Democratic Party, whatever they may be, people who are on Team Democracy, what do you think we should do to fight back against those kinds of assaults on the people's power? Thank you.
Hey, Aram, great question, man. Thank you. in no particular order. Everybody listening right now who is not a Trumpist, and most Americans are not Trumpists, we've got to take a longer view. It's taken a long time to get here. Our democracy, I believe, is hanging by a thread. Trump didn't create that. Trump's like the ugly product of a broken political system. It's going to take a long time to get this democracy back on firm feet. Most importantly, we got to vote. And by the way, every indicator shows that Republicans are way more fired up to vote in November than Democrats. Huh? Seriously? Every survey shows that. Now, I don't know how that can be. So somebody clearly isn't conveying to independents and Democrats that our democracy is at risk. There needs to be a national messaging effort on that. And then, Aram, at the state level, you're right. Again, Democrats have been asleep. Republicans have not. They are transforming the way elections are run and who's in charge of elections at the state level. Democrats need to put spotlights on these efforts at the state level. Texas and Wisconsin need to try to defeat them wherever they can and need to run their own people for these state and local offices, especially secretaries of state.
We are going to go next to Ken. So over to Ken next.
Congressman, I have a question. Do you think it makes more sense for people to stay in a party, or if they're going to be unaffiliated, maybe as an election comes closer, that they should just basically decide, which party am I going to be in for this election? Because which election can I influence, to get somebody maybe who's a little bit more centered, and that's kind of my question. I think you understand it.
Yes. And Ken, that especially makes sense to stay in a party and vote for a party, especially for the state and local and even the congressional races. Amen. That's got to be done. I want to remind everybody of something that, and maybe many of you are younger than me. I'm an old fart. I think right now we are at a revolutionary moment in American history. I said this 10 years ago when I was in Congress before Trump. Stuff's happening, guys. The two-party duopoly, I think, is done. I think something else is coming. I think you're going to see other major reforms state by state in how we elect people, things like ranked choice voting. I think I know it's a heavy lift, but there's going to continue to be this barrage on the Electoral College. Our political system is broken. That's why we got Trump. Both political parties right now, kind of suck. The Republicans more because they're a threat to democracy. But the Democrats got their issues as well. Most Americans, for the first time in history, more than 50% of Americans identify as independent. This is a moment, guys. Stuff's happening that's bigger than all of us.
Put down the tequila, my friend. It's only 9 p.m.
I haven't started drinking yet, Justin.
I love your enthusiasm. That's where we'll leave the third party talk. But you sound like a libertarian. God forbid.
Hey, but Justin, tell me, you don't like the third party talk, do you?
I just don't think it's realistic. I think that all the support that you have from all of these big donors makes it really difficult. But not only that, Joe, you have the media outlets, which make it really, really difficult because they play to one side or the other. It's silent off, like you said earlier. And then lastly, and this is probably the most impactful thing because you can change the other two, it's shown that down ballot races in a party really do affect every single vote for Congress. So if you have a bunch of Democrats running in a state and it's at the state and local and dog catcher, that actually boosts the federal level. And now you have two parties, which are machines at actually getting people to run in these positions. So I just don't think there's enough oxygen, man.
Justin, if that makes sense. The first past the post election system. That's the main reason we have two parties. First past the post.
Guys, I think the only difference is I think big money is going to enter the fray. Republicans and Democrats have built this system that's made it really hard for anybody else to come in. The only thing that can overcome that is big, big, big money. And there's big, big, big money that is going to come in because that's where the market is.
So help me then. The big money that comes in to these parties, generally speaking, does so to make more money. I'm thinking of the Kochs. I'm thinking of Adelson. I'm thinking of Eric Prince and Betsy DeVos. And you can go down the list on the other side as well because they're promoting pro-business policies. So what's the incentive for them if big money generally doesn't work for democracy?
Because this Republican Party, this anti-democracy, pro-authoritarian Republican Party is increasingly not good for big money people. And respectfully to my Democratic friends, if the Democratic Party continues to move left, that's not good for big money people. And I'll tell you, Justin, there are as many big, big, big money people who are center left and center right as there are on either right or left. They have not been engaged. That's, I think, going to change.
Okay.
Well, I think the example of the Kochs, doesn't it demonstrate that the more effective way is just to spend money within the party umbrella and promote candidates that agree with you inside that party?
And completely fuck up that party.
Yeah.
Well, John, if you're the Kochs, they've spent a lot of money in the Republican Party over the years. I don't think they've seen a great return for their buck in the last 5 to 8 years, or probably longer.
The Trump tax cuts weren't that bad.
They don't like this Republican Party. Go ahead, Justin.
The Trump tax cuts weren't that bad for them.
Yeah, they didn't love. Maybe they liked some of that, but that's about it.
That is all we have for you today. Again, huge thanks to former Congressman Joe Walsh, to our audience for their questions, and to you for being here. A reminder, like all of our episodes, this is an edited version of a much longer conversation that was taped with live audience questions. For information about how to join us or past episodes, please visit our website, pm101.live. Please also take a second to subscribe on whichever streaming service you're using right now, so you don't miss our next episode this Friday featuring Matt Stoller, who's a fellow at the Open Markets Institute and an expert on the history and politics of monopoly power. This has been Politics and Media 101, produced in partnership with Clubhouse. I'm Jeff Browning on behalf of Justin Higgins, our co-founder, and our team. Thank you very much for being here. We hope to see you and hear from you soon.